The morning of July 2022 began like any other in Loganville, Georgia, a quiet suburb east of Atlanta where neighbors know each other by name and children play in yards until the streetlights flicker on. But inside a modest home on a tree-lined street, something was about to fracture the peace of this community forever. Law enforcement vehicles arrived without sirens, their presence drawing curtains aside and sending whispers through the neighborhood. The target was a house occupied by William and Zachary Zulock, a married couple who had presented themselves to the world as model citizens. William worked for the government, maintaining a steady career that required security clearances and background checks. Zachary held a position in banking, handling money and accounts with the precision expected of someone in finance. Together they had adopted two young brothers through a Christian agency specializing in children with special needs, presenting themselves as saviors to the city, boys who needed a home. Their social media accounts displayed smiling faces and matching shirts that declared, "Love my family," alongside rainbow imagery suggesting progressive values. They attended community events and posted photographs of family dinners. To anyone observing from the outside, the Zulocks represented the best of modern American family life. But the officers who approached their door that morning possessed information that would expose everything beneath that carefully constructed surface. A tip had arrived at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that tracks the darkest corners of the internet. The tip contained digital evidence linking an IP address in Walton County to child sexual abuse material. That address belonged to the Zulock home. The investigation that brought authorities to the Zulock doorstep began not in Georgia, but in the digital infrastructure that connects predators across state lines. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children operates as a clearinghouse for reports of online exploitation, receiving thousands of tips annually from technology companies required by law to report suspected illegal content. Their analysts had identified material so disturbing that it triggered immediate referral to law enforcement. The trail led first to Hunter Lawless, a man whose name would eventually become footnote to a larger horror. When investigators confronted Lawless at his residence, he offered no resistance and attempted no deception. He admitted immediately to downloading child sexual abuse material, providing details about his own culpability without hesitation. But Lawless understood that cooperation might mitigate his own sentence, and he offered investigators something more valuable than his confession. He told them the material did not originate with him. He was merely a consumer, he explained, not a producer. The creator of the content, the person who filmed and photographed the abuse, was a man named Zachary Zulock. Lawless described receiving videos directly from Zulock, images that appeared to be recorded inside a family home featuring two young boys. He added a detail that would haunt investigators throughout the subsequent investigation. Zulock had not merely shared existing material, he had offered Lawless physical access to the children themselves, proposing that Lawless visit the home and participate in person. That offer had not been accepted, or at least Lawless claimed it had not. But the existence of such communication transformed the case from distribution to active solicitation. Lawless would later plead guilty to sexual exploitation of children and receive a 20-year sentence. His cooperation also led to the arrest of Luis Vicaro Sanchez, another consumer who would receive 60 years. But the primary target remained the man at the source. When investigators executed the search warrant at the Zulock residence, they expected to find evidence of child pornography possession and distribution. What they discovered instead was a fully operational production facility disguised as a family home. Cameras had been installed throughout the house, not in the obvious positions used for home security, but in locations carefully chosen to capture maximum footage of the children who lived there. Living rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, hallways, every space where two young boys might exist in their own home had been wired for surveillance. And the surveillance served no protective purpose. These cameras did not watch for intruders. They watched the children. They recorded the children. They documented the systematic abuse that both fathers perpetrated against the sons they had adopted through a Christian agency. Investigators began cataloging evidence and quickly realized the scale exceeded anything they had anticipated. Digital storage devices filled with files occupied multiple rooms. External hard drives, memory cards, computers, cloud accounts. The men had been recording for years, building an archive of abuse that defied comprehension. The total volume of material eventually measured 7 terabytes. To understand what 7 terabytes represents requires context that most people lack, because most people will never encounter crime on this scale. A single terabyte can hold approximately 500,000 photographs. 7 terabytes equals 3.5 million images. If the material consisted entirely of video rather than photographs, 7 terabytes would represent more than 3,000 hours of footage. 3,000 hours is 125 days of continuous playback. The children in these recordings were 10 and 12 years old when investigators removed them from the home. They had been recording since before either boy reached school age. The charges filed against William and Zachary Zulock reflected the comprehensive nature of their crimes. The charges filed against William and Zachary Zulock reflected the comprehensive nature of their crimes. William faced 6 counts of aggravated sodomy, a charge under Georgia law that carries severe penalties because it involves sexual acts deemed especially violent or degrading. He faced 3 counts of aggravated child molestation, which requires proof that the victim was under 16 and that the act involved serious physical or emotional harm. 2 counts of sexual exploitation of children addressed his role in creating and distributing the material found throughout the home. Additional charges covered other sexual offenses too numerous to list individually. Zachary's indictment mirrored his husband's, but added 2 counts of pandering for a person under 18, a charge that specifically addressed his efforts to offer the children to other adults, including Hunter Lawless. The pandering charges transformed the case from family abuse to sex trafficking, acknowledging that these fathers had attempted to commercialize the violation of their own sons. Both men were arrested and held without bond, their professional lives and community standing evaporating the moment the charges became public. Former colleagues at the government agency where William worked expressed shock, describing him as quiet and professional. Banking associates who knew Zachary through industry events remembered him as unremarkable, the kind of person who blends into any crowd. Neighbors who had waved at the family during morning commutes now avoided eye contact with reporters. The Christian agency that facilitated the adoption launched an internal review, though agency representatives declined to discuss specifics, citing privacy laws protecting the children. Questions about how the screening process failed to identify these predators would follow the agency for months, though no system can predict behavior that its subjects actively hide. The investigation revealed communication patterns that exposed the men's intentions long before their arrest. Text messages recovered from their devices showed discussions about their attraction to young boys dating back years, predating the adoption of their sons. These messages were not coded or subtle. They explicitly described sexual desires directed at children and included plans to satisfy those desires through adoption. In one exchange, a father told a friend that he intended to have sex with his son and instructed the friend to await confirmation. Subsequent messages provided that confirmation, describing acts committed against the child in explicit detail. The recipients of these messages varied, suggesting the men maintained a network of individuals who shared their interests and who received regular updates about the abuse occurring in the Zulock home. Some recipients responded with encouragement. Others apparently received the information passively. None reported the messages to authorities. This failure to report represents a secondary tragedy in the case, an opportunity for intervention that passed unused while children suffered. The messages also documented the men's awareness that their actions were criminal. They discussed precautions. They discussed avoiding detection. They discussed what might happen if they were caught. These discussions demonstrate that the men understood right from wrong and chose wrong repeatedly over years. They were not ignorant of the law or confused about the nature of their acts. They were predators who calculated risks and decided the pleasure of abusing children outweighed the consequences of potential exposure. That calculation failed only because a consumer in another state downloaded their product and investigators followed the digital trail back to its source. The children themselves emerged from the Zulock home with damage that professionals describe as profound and lasting. Removed from the only family environment they had known since adoption, they entered state custody with physical and psychological injuries that would require years of treatment. Medical examinations documented evidence consistent with repeated sexual abuse over extended periods. Psychological assessments revealed trauma responses including hypervigilance, dissociation, and difficulty forming attachments to caregivers. The boys had been taught that adults exist to use children, that home offers no safety, that love is a word predators use to disguise predation. Reversing these lessons requires therapeutic intervention beyond what most foster care systems can provide. Specialized programs exist for children who have experienced severe sexual abuse, but availability varies by location and funding. The boys were placed in a secure therapeutic foster home where caregivers received training in trauma-informed approaches. They began attending counseling sessions multiple times weekly, sometimes individually, and sometimes with siblings to process their shared experience. They started school in new environments where no one knew their history and where teachers received instructions about potential triggers without learning details that might prejudice their interactions. The road ahead stretches long for these children. Trauma experienced during formative years reshapes brain development, affecting emotional regulation, impulse control, and the ability to form trusting relationships. Some children emerge from such experiences with remarkable resilience. Others carry wounds that never fully heal. The outcome depends on factors including the quality of subsequent care, the child's inherent temperament, and the unpredictable nature of human recovery. William Zulock made a strategic decision in August when he appeared before the court and pleaded guilty to all charges against him. The decision eliminated the possibility of trial, sparing the children from testimony that would require them to describe their abuse publicly. It also eliminated any chance of acquittal, though the evidence against him made acquittal virtually impossible regardless. Prosecutors had 7 terabytes of material showing William engaged in specific acts with specific children at specific times. They had text messages in which William discussed those acts before and after they occurred. They had witnesses including Hunter Lawless, who could testify about William's willingness to share material and offer access. A trial would have consumed resources and traumatized victims without changing the outcome. William's plea acknowledged reality and moved the case toward resolution. Zachary Zulock chose a different path, pleading guilty to most charges but contesting one count through a bench trial where a judge rather than a jury would decide his fate. The strategy made little sense to observers familiar with the evidence. Contesting a single count while admitting others does not reduce overall exposure when the admitted counts already carry sentences exceeding any human lifespan. Perhaps Zachary hoped to preserve some technical defense for appeal. Perhaps he simply could not accept the totality of his situation. The bench trial proceeded quickly, with the judge reviewing evidence and returning a guilty verdict on the contested count. Zachary gained nothing from the exercise except additional legal fees and a demonstration that even partial denial of responsibility would fail. Both men now stood convicted of every charge filed against them, awaiting sentencing that would determine whether they ever saw freedom again. The sentencing hearing drew attention from media outlets across Georgia and beyond, though the courtroom remained restricted to protect the children's identities. Victim impact statements were submitted in writing rather than delivered orally, sparing the boys the ordeal of facing their abusers in court. Prosecutors presented arguments for maximum sentences, describing the case as among the most aggravated they had ever encountered. They emphasized the duration of abuse, the recording and distribution of material, the attempted solicitation of additional perpetrators, and the profound betrayal involved in adopting children specifically to exploit them. Defense attorneys offered mitigation arguments focusing on mental health issues and the defendant's acceptance of responsibility, though acceptance was partial in Zachary's case. They requested sentences that would allow eventual release, arguing that 100-year terms constituted de facto life without parole and eliminated any possibility of rehabilitation. The judge listened to both sides before delivering a decision that would define the remainder of both men's existence. William Zulock was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Zachary Zulock received identical sentence, 100 years without parole. The sentences run consecutively where multiple counts produced overlapping terms, meaning the men will serve every day of every year before any eligibility for release arises. 100 years from the date of sentencing places potential release in the year 2122. Neither man will live to see that year. Neither man will leave prison except in a coffin. The sentence achieves finality that life terms with parole eligibility sometimes lack, ensuring these predators never again walk among free people. The district attorney's office issued a formal statement following sentencing that attempted to balance horror at the crimes with recognition of the system that caught the perpetrators. The statement described the Zulock home as a house of horrors, borrowing language that investigators had used during the initial search. It acknowledged the importance of adoption as an institution while condemning those who exploit it for predatory purposes. The statement specifically praised the resilience of the two young victims, noting that their strength during the investigation and legal proceedings had inspired everyone involved in the case. This public recognition of child victims is unusual in sexual abuse cases, where privacy concerns typically prevent any reference to the children's experiences. The district attorney's decision to mention the boys reflected confidence that their identities would remain protected, while acknowledging their humanity in a proceeding that might otherwise reduce them to evidence. The statement also thanked the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Computer Crimes Unit for their technical work in tracing the digital evidence back to its source. Without that tracing, the Zulocks might still be abusing children today, their cameras still recording, their network still expanding. The statement concluded with a promise that the district attorney's office would continue pursuing similar cases with equal vigor, sending a message to predators that Georgia law enforcement would not tolerate exploitation of children. Whether such messages deter actual predators remains debatable, but the statement served its immediate purpose of communicating resolution to a public horrified by the details that had emerged during the case. The children continue their recovery in a location undisclosed to protect their safety and privacy. They attend school. They receive therapy. They experience moments of ordinary childhood that their first family denied them. The road ahead contains obstacles that professionals can predict and others that will emerge unexpectedly. Developmental milestones may arrive late or differently than expected. Trust may prove difficult to extend even to caregivers who have earned it. Intimacy in adulthood may carry complications that peers without trauma histories will not understand. But the boys have advantages that many similarly situated children lack. They are young enough that intervention began before their personalities fully formed. They have each other, siblings who share their experience and can validate each other's memories when doubt creeps in. They have captured public attention that may translate into resources for their ongoing care. And they have certainty that their abusers will never harm them again. A certainty that victims of unsolved crimes never obtain. The Zulock case will fade from headlines as all cases eventually do. New horrors will emerge to capture public attention. New children will suffer similar fates because predators exist in every community and no system catches them all. But for these two boys, the story reached resolution as complete as justice permits. Their fathers will die in prison. They will live in freedom. The cameras are gone now. The recording has stopped. What remains is the long, slow work of becoming whole.